Hello Svelte community. I'm going to talk to you about how we did elevate the developer experience of using Storybook for Svelte. My name is Mateusz, and for the concept of this talk, just a Storybook contributor. Let's briefly introduce what is Storybook. For me, it's a tool which enables me to have a productive workshop to develop, document, and test UI components and page in isolation. And that means I don't need to worry about running the whole application architecture to start working on them. And inside the Storybook, I can cover every possible visual edge case. And right, the Storybook also has a very rich ecosystem. Recently, they announced an integration with Vita's testing framework, and that's quite exciting. Okay, let's move on. This code example shows how do you write the stories for Svelte in regular format. And I'm gonna show you a quick preview on what it produces in practice. Now, please just try to remember that in this regular format, we can see the export default method as well as export objects for each story. Right? And since Storybook is a catalog, this highlight line help populate the sidebar on the left. We got that, right? So, what if I told you that you can write stories using Svelte syntax? That would be awesome, right? And yes, it's possible thanks to this add-on, which allows us to achieve that. And to make it simple, I'm going to call it Svelte format. Now, I want to show you a difference between regular and Svelte format. On the right is the regular one, and on the left is Svelte. There is no so much difference, right? And that was intentional, because this add-on is supposed to adhere closer to the Storybook API. So there's less confusion, less surprise, and more consistent. In the regular format, the stories are objects, and in the Svelte format, stories are components. Still, you might wonder why we would bother to make it possible. Two reasons. Flexibility. Using the Svelte syntax language, I am no longer limited to use, for example, Svelte blocks such as if loop, if condition, or promise with await. And the second reason is that I can leverage Svelte feature, and I am talking about reactivity, binding, runes, etc. And I am no longer limited to what I want to be displayed inside the story because of the JavaScript language syntax. And about Svelte 5, recently me and Jeppe from Storybook core maintainer team did a ground refactor on the Storybook add-on to support it and build better its paradigm. So, the challenge we encountered and the lessons we learned are the reason why I am here talking to you. So finally, let's hop to this question. How it works? Okay, so the first challenge I want to talk about is how do we communicate to Storybook which stories are in the stories Svelte file. As you might remember that in the Svelte format, we don't have any export at all like in the regular one. So, how do we send the highlight crucial data so it can populate the sidebar on the left? Luckily, the solution for this case is quite easy. First, the Storybook has an interface API. So, what we need to do is to hook into it and use the parse function from the Svelte compiler module to get the AST, and it means abstract syntax tree. In practice, it's one big scale object with a lot of the syntax nodes. But it doesn't have to be scaled at all. If you already had the chance to play around the Svelte 5 playground, you might already saw it, and I'm going to show you. Okay, on the left, the Svelte code format as input. Please notice that on the range pane, the last tab called AST output, And this is what we are going to use for this particular case. This is very useful because as soon as you, for example, hover on the module property, we get the script tab highlight and its body scope. Or, for example, when we hover on the fragment, all of the stories in this code will get highlight. We can go deeper than that. For example, if I wanted to find the first story in the fragment, we can go to the second item. For example, if we want to extract the name attribute and it's either below, we can go into the component attributes and find the attribute called name, then extract this value, which will be primary. This is nice. And this is what we are going to use for static analytics for this add-on needs. What I showed you was a basic foundational knowledge on how you can explore the Svelte AST. Back to the solution. Luckily, the Svelte maintainer created also a really nice package called a SimMainFrame, which allows us to do some really convenient working on the AST object and extract the particular nodes for our needs. Okay, time for another challenge. Very major one. What we did before, it didn't enable the Storybook to render the stories correctly. And what I am talking about is the body of the Storybook, and this is what it looks like, to remind you. So, the challenge is that the Svelte has adopted concept of the single file component, and how it affects us in practice. I'm going to show you using the Svelte file playground. In the playground, on the right pane, the second tab is called JavaScript output. And that's where we can find our compile output. Now, everything that we write in the storage Svelte file becomes one big MAM function, which is one component, and is exported by default. And that's a problem, because the Storybook engine has no idea what to do with this one. To quickly remind you, in the regular format, we defined our export, for example, the meta or the storage. And that's how we tell Storybook what to render. And this is the reason of why we have to transform the compile output. And Bit plugin API can help us with that. Thanks to Jesper, I learned that there's really nice debugging tool which I am going to use and explain better of what is happening inside this add-on. This is how this inspector tool looks like. Let's focus on the button storage Svelte file and click on it. On the left sidebar, we can find the transform stack, and it has every plugin which show from the first input to the last transformation. We are going to focus on the Storybook add-on plugin. On the left, you can see the compile output. And on the right, there's our transformation that is happening for this file. It's like git diff preview, quite convenient, right? So you remember that in the regular format, the export default is meta, but in the compile output is the main component function. So we have to remove this line and then replace it with meta. But where is meta? And this is where we do the heavy lifting for you behind the scenes to help you focus on writing stories, to improve the developer experience. Anyway, what happened to the meta is that we are destructuring it from the defined meta function call. And then, at the end of the transform compile output, we add the export default meta. Okay, now the story. They need to be exported to write. But where are they? We should make a good guess if we remember the concept of single file component, that they live inside the main function scope. So, the first story should be the primary, and there it is. And the second story, small, is there. But the question is that given they live inside the function scope, how do you export them? Okay, so we can see that everything that is happening in the main component function scope, everything that is happening here, I'm making a wild guess that what is happening here is related to the activity, binding, and the templating. We don't need to understand in depth what is happening here. Anyway, what we can do about this? Create runtime storage. This is a fancy name invented by Jeb to help us understand better the purpose of this function. We don't have time to explore more in depth what it does, so that's why I'm going to skip to the end of the transform output. You can notice that I'm importing the create runtime storage function and then use it to export every storage we define in the Svelte storage file as component. And this is how we solve this problem. I know this might take you a while to understand what is happening here, and it's quite advanced even for myself. Regardless, you might have noticed that we didn't really modify the main component function a lot. We just add more export at the end of the compile output, and all of it to break out the paradigm of Svelte, which is single file component. Now I wish I had the more time to expand the rest of the transformation, but I have to move forward. Finally, let's wrap this talk with some takeaways. Firstly, I hope I gave you some inspiration on how you can do some AST transformation on the Svelte compile code or the input. It doesn't have to be scary at all if you have the right tools. And this is how you can improve the developer experience of your projects, and even the obstacles such as per single file component doesn't have to block you from doing it. And lastly, I want to buy some excitement because as soon as the Svelte pipe is out of the RC, I hope it's soon, then the Storybook add-on to help you write stories in the Svelte format will be shortly ready. And by the way, you're going to have the support for the legacy API, so you can still have the stories in the old syntax because they are supposed to still work. We got your back there, and you can already try it out in the next version of this stack. So if you have the time and opportunity to try it out, please do share with us what do you think. Thank you.